April 8, 1943. 25,000 feet above the blue shimmer of the Solomon Sea, the sun glared off the polished aluminum skin of a twin-boomed aircraft, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Inside its cramped cockpit, Lieutenant Thomas Hawk Henderson gripped the control yoke, sweat beading beneath his oxygen mask. The twin Allison engines howled like angry hornets as he pushed the throttles forward, climbing to intercept a formation of Japanese bombers inbound from Rabaul. Below him, the ocean looked peaceful, too peaceful for the chaos about to unfold. Over the radio, voices crackled through static. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, looks like Betty bombers with zero escort. Henderson's squadron, the 379th Fighter Squadron, the Sunsetters, banked in formation. 12 lightnings formed a jagged arrow across the sky. To their enemies, these machines were an oddity. In Rabaul, captured photos of the P-38 had earned laughter from Luftwaffe pilots, advising their Japanese allies. Eine fliegende Sag, one German called it, a flying coffin, twin engines, twin tails, and a reputation for engine failures made it seem like a death trap to anyone who'd flown a BO-190, and in truth, early Lightnings had earned that name. Their engines overheated, their compressibility made dives lethal, and their long range came at the cost of maneuverability. Pilots called it the fork-tailed devil, but back then, that nickname came with equal parts fear and frustration. But this wasn't the P-38 of 1942 anymore. The U.S. Army Air Forces had learned, the mechanics at Guadalcanal had tuned and modified, engineers at Lockheed had refined the turbo superchargers, and pilots had trained relentlessly. Now the flying coffin was about to prove it could be something far more terrifying. The first burst of enemy fire sliced across the formation. Henderson rolled sharply, the Lightning's wide wings cutting the air with a hiss. He spotted a Zero diving in from above, a flash of silver and red. Instinct took over. He kicked the rudder, rolled inverted, and pulled into a steep dive. The G-forces pressed him into the seat. As the altimeter spun wildly, a warning horn blared, the dreaded sound that once meant death to Lightning pilots. But this time he knew the trick. Level out at 15,000, reduce throttle, wait for control to return. Henderson had drilled this maneuver 100 times. The Zero overshot, unable to follow the Lightning's screaming descent. Henderson pulled up, lined his gun sight, and squeezed the trigger. 450 caliber Brownings and a 20mm cannon spat fire. The Zero disintegrated in a burst of flame and falling metal. Splash one Zeke, he shouted. The radio erupted in cheers. Around him, the twin-tailed devils tore through the Japanese formation with ruthless precision. The bombers never made it to Guadalcanal that day. By the time Henderson landed, oil streaked across his canopy, and the sun hung low over the jungle. Ground crewmen gathered around, counting bullet holes and shaking their heads in disbelief. The flying coffin, once mocked by both friend and foe, had just cleared the skies of the Imperial Japanese Navy, and soon it would do something even more unthinkable, something that would shake the Japanese command to its core. Section 2: The Birth of a Killer. How the Lightning was forged. The sun set over Henderson Field that evening, bathing the metal wings of the P-38s in a dull orange glow. Mechanics worked under floodlights, tools clinking, sweat dripping in the humid Pacific air. Every Lightning bore the scars of combat, bullet holes patched with aluminum plates, engines blackened from oil leaks, propellers nicked by coral dust. Lieutenant Henderson sat on an overturned crate, watching Ground Crew Chief Sergeant Mac McAllister pull a scorched spark plug from one of the Allisons. You push her too hard, she'll cook herself before the Japs get a chance. Henderson smiled wearily. Yeah, but when she flies right, nothing can touch her. That wasn't bravado. The P-38's story had begun years earlier. Long before the war, back in 1937, the U.S. Army Air Corps had issued a radical request: design a high-altitude interceptor capable of 360 miles far, something that could outclimb, outrun, and outgun anything in the sky. Lockheed's young engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, took the challenge personally. He didn't just build a plane, he invented a new concept: the twin boom design, twin engines, and a central pod for the pilot and guns. It looked like something from the future. But innovation came at a cost. The first prototype, the XP-38, crashed on its delivery flight. Compressibility, an aerodynamic phenomenon no one fully understood then, caused the controls to lock up in high-speed dives. Later, tropical heat in the Pacific caused vapor lock and engine failures. To the pilots who lost friends, it was more than a machine. It was a gamble. Many called it the flying coffin. But Lockheed refused to quit. New intercoolers, better superchargers, and revised dive flaps were installed. Mechanics learned to tame the Allisons by running richer fuel mixtures and cooling systems. Slowly, the Lightning evolved from a temperamental experiment to a killing machine. In Europe, early P-38s struggled against German fighters, but in the Pacific, where long-range and high-altitude performance mattered more than tight turning, the Lightning found its domain. The distances between islands were vast. A single patrol could mean 8 hours in the cockpit. Japanese Zeros could dance and turn tighter, but they couldn't match the Lightning's reach or its firepower. 5 machine guns and 1 cannon, all mounted in the nose, meant no convergence issues, just point and shoot. When that concentrated burst hit, even the nimble Zeros vanished in seconds. By early 1943, the Japanese were beginning to realize something had changed. Their scouts reported new American planes patrolling at altitudes previously unreachable, and soon, one of those planes would alter the entire course of the Pacific War, not through sheer numbers or firepower, but through precision. Somewhere, deep in the jungles of Bougainville, radio intercept officers picked up a coded message. A flight plan carrying the name of the most powerful man in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Section 3. Operation Vengeance. Hunting the Mastermind of Pearl Harbor. April 14, 1943. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. A hush hung over the operations tent as Major John W. Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron spread a map across a wooden table. Around him stood 14 of his best pilots, men who had flown through fire over the Solomons. The humid night buzzed with insects and tension. Colonel Benjamin Kelsey, one of the mission planners, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, what you're about to hear is top secret. Not a word of this leaves this tent." He paused, letting the moment sink in. Then he said the name that made every man in the room straighten: Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The pilots exchanged stunned looks. Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man whose attack had dragged America into war. Kelsey continued, "We've intercepted his personal flight schedule. He'll be flying from Rabaul to Balea, inspecting forward air bases. He believes the Pacific is his domain. We're going to prove him wrong." The plan, codenamed Operation Vengeance, was audacious, nearly suicidal. Yamamoto's route took him over Bougainville, deep behind enemy lines. The distance from Guadalcanal to the interception point was over 400 miles, far beyond the range of most fighters. Only one plane could do it: the P-38 Lightning. Mitchell's squadron would have to fly low, treetop low, across open ocean, relying on dead reckoning and precise timing. 1 degree off course, 1 minute late, and they'd missed their target entirely. As the briefing ended, the pilots gathered their gear in silence. For many, the mission carried a sense of vengeance, not just for Pearl Harbor, but for friends lost in the jungles and seas of the Pacific. April 18, 1940, 14 P-38s roared off the coral strip of Henderson Field, each loaded with extra fuel tanks. They flew in two waves, one group to intercept, the other to cover their retreat. Engines hummed steadily, propellers slicing through the humid air as they skimmed just 50 feet above the waves. The ocean stretched endlessly before them. Navigation was done by stopwatch, compass, and instinct. Every minute mattered. At precisely 0934, they climbed to interception altitude, 18,000 feet, over Bougainville. Then, like ghosts, the enemy appeared. Two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 fighters, glittered in the sunlight. One of those bombers carried Admiral Yamamoto. Major Mitchell gave the order, execute attack plan, go. The Lightning split formation. Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr. and First Lieutenant Rex Barber dove toward the bombers at full throttle. The sky erupted into chaos. Traces, contrails, the thunder of engines. Lanphier swung in behind a Betty, firing a long burst. Smoke poured from its starboard engine. It fell into the jungle below. Barber chased the second bomber, Yamamoto's plane, spraying .50 caliber fire through the fuselage. Flames erupted, and the bomber rolled over, disappearing into the canopy. It was over in less than 5 minutes. The Lightnings turned south, throttles wide open, hugging the ocean waves once more. Zeros gave chase, but the P-38s outran them easily, their twin engines screaming with raw power. Hours later, as the exhausted pilots landed at Guadalcanal, word began to spread. A Japanese broadcast confirmed the unthinkable. Admiral Yamamoto was dead. The flying Coffin, once mocked as unreliable and awkward, had just delivered one of the most precise assassinations in aviation history. And across the Pacific, the myth of Japanese invincibility began to crack. Section 4. The Turning Tide. The Lightning's reign over the Pacific. The news of Yamamoto's death spread through the American lines like wildfire. Pilots, sailors, and infantrymen alike whispered in disbelief. They got him. The man behind Pearl Harbor. Gone. In Tokyo, the reaction was very different. The Imperial Navy shrouded Yamamoto's death in secrecy for weeks, announcing it only after a state funeral was arranged. But the morale shock was devastating. The Japanese had lost not only their most brilliant strategist, but also a symbol of their confidence, and the weapon that killed him, the twin-boomed flying Coffin, now became a legend. Across the Pacific, P-38 Lightnings began to dominate the sky. At New Guinea, over the Solomons, and later the Philippines, their long-range and devastating firepower proved unmatched. While the agile Japanese Zero could outturn most opponents, it could not escape the Lightning's speed or climb rate. From high above the jungle canopy, pairs of P-38s patrolled like predators, their polished wings flashing in the sun. One pilot described it perfectly. When you saw those twin tails cutting through the clouds, you knew angels were watching over you, but devils were watching over the enemy. Among the aces who made their names in the P-38 was Major Richard Bong, America's top-scoring ace of the war with 40 confirmed kills, flying his P-38 named Maj. Adorned with his sweetheart's portrait, Bong became the embodiment of the aircraft's transformation, from failure to legend. In the Philippines, Thomas Maguire, another P-38 ace, racked up 38 victories, often returning to base with holes in his wings and oil streaks on his canopy. The Lightning's role wasn't limited to dogfighting. It escorted bombers on marathon missions over Japanese strongholds, attacked enemy shipping, and strafed airfields with terrifying precision. Its heavy armament, 4 P-30 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, could tear through fighters, bombers, and even ground targets. Pilots loved its range, reliability, and stability. They could fly farther, higher, and longer than almost any other Allied fighter. In a single mission, a Lightning could take off from New Guinea, destroy an airfield 500 miles away, and return without refueling, something no Zero could dream of. By late 1944, the P-38 had become the spearhead of American air power in the Pacific. In the skies over Lae, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, Japanese pilots who once mocked the Lightning now feared the distinctive outline of its twin tails. Captured Japanese reports described it with a mix of awe and dread. The American twin-tail fighter attacks swiftly and disappears into the clouds. It is very fast, very strong. Avoid combat with it at all costs. The flying Coffin had become the fork-tailed devil, but beyond its kill counts and missions, the P-38 represented something deeper, the relentless evolution of American ingenuity. Every flaw had been studied, every weakness overcome, until the aircraft became a weapon of near perfection. For the men who flew it, survival wasn't guaranteed, but confidence was. The Lightning was no longer a coffin. It was a lifeline, and soon as the Allies advanced toward Japan itself, it would play one final, critical role, bringing the war to the enemy's doorstep. Section 5. Lightning over Tokyo. The final missions. Spring 1945. The Pacific War was entering its final, brutal chapter. Japan's once mighty empire was shrinking under the relentless advance of American forces. The Mariana Islands had fallen, Iwo Jima was secured, and from newly captured airfields, the U.S. now had direct access to the Japanese mainland. Among the first aircraft to strike that mainland were the P-38 Lightnings. At dawn, over the smoldering ruins of Okinawa, a squadron of gleaming twin-tailed fighters rose from the runway, their engines roaring like thunder across the sea. They climbed through clouds heavy with monsoon mist, their destination marked only by coordinates and faith, Tokyo. For years the P-38 had ruled the skies over jungles and islands, but now it faced its greatest test, escorting long-range B-29 superfortresses on bombing missions deep into the heart of Japan. It was a dangerous, punishing duty. Enemy flak burst like black flowers around them, and desperate Japanese interceptors, Ki-84s and N-1K2Js clawed into the sky. But the Lightning's speed and firepower kept the bombers safe, cutting down attackers before they could close in. On one such mission, Captain William Tex Hill, of the fortified 9th Fighter Squadron, recalled watching a B-29 under heavy attack. 3 Zeros came in from the sun, diving straight for the bomber. We rolled in from 25,000 feet, throttles wide open. The first burst blew the lead Zero apart. It just vanished. The others scattered. That B-29 made it home. That's what the Lightning was for. By then, Japan's Air Force was a shadow of its former self. The elite pilots, who once mocked the P-38 as ungainly, were gone, replaced by inexperienced trainees and kamikaze volunteers. The Lightning's dominance was so complete that American pilots began using it for photo reconnaissance. Unarmed versions, stripped of guns and painted silver, darting over Tokyo at 30,000 feet, capturing images of factories, shipyards and airfields. The Japanese tried to intercept them, but the P-38s were too fast. Ironically, those same reconnaissance photos helped guide the bombing campaigns that would soon bring Japan to its knees. Even as newer fighters like the P-51 Mustang began to take over escort duties, the Lightning remained indispensable in the Pacific, a bridge between early desperation and final victory. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, many P-38s were still on combat alert, their wings glinting in the sunrise over Saipan and Tinian. The war had transformed them. The same aircraft once branded a flying coffin was now hailed as one of the most versatile and deadly designs of the entire conflict. In the words of General George C. Kenney, commander of Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific, the P-38 is the most effective weapon we have against the enemy. Period. If I could, I'd fill the whole sky with them. But for the pilots who flew the Lightning, its true legacy wasn't just in the missions won, it was in the comrades lost, the endless hours over empty ocean, and the knowledge that they had turned a flawed machine into a symbol of victory. As the Pacific fell silent, many of those pilots looked one last time at the twin tails of their Lightnings gleaming in the tropical sun, and felt a quiet pride. The flying Coffin had become the sword that struck the Empire, and in that transformation lay the story of an entire war, of failure, adaptation and triumph against impossible odds.